Hey, thanks for clicking on this video. Today, we're diving into a super creepy phenomenon that's seriously haunting Canada, especially British Columbia. Get this, it's not just one or two, but the latest count is 24 human feet that have been found floating around the river mouths and coastline of this province. Creepy, right? Feet. Like who's casually tossing out shoes with feet still in them? The question is, what's really going on, and where are these feet even coming from? Don't go anywhere, because we're about to dive deep into this chilling case that's been keeping Canada, and even nearby Washington, which weirdly has a long history with serial killers, up at night. This case kicked off with the discovery of a foot on Cherry Island in Everett, Washington, USA. On the first day of 2019, a few people were out enjoying a New Year's Day walk. But a dog, out with its owner Mike Johnson, got restless and led them off the path. Turns out the dog found a shoe, except this one had a human foot bone inside. Mike immediately called 911 to report the creepy find. When the cops arrived at the scene, Mike noticed they didn't seem as hyped up as they usually do for cases like this. Usually they'd be whispering excitedly, but this time, their tone was more like when someone tells you the cafeteria is closing early. Mike couldn't help but wonder, what do the police already know? A few days later, the police announced that this was the 21st shoe and foot discovery in over a decade. Well, it's clearly not a shoe collecting contest, Mike thought. The next step for the police and forensics team was to figure out who the foot belonged to and how they died. After some digging, a woman named Jenny Nill came forward, saying she recognized the shoe. It belonged to her son, Antonio Jordan Hill, who'd gone missing on December 12, 2016, 3 years before the foot was found. The police extracted DNA from the foot and compared it to Antonio's DNA from his mom's home. Sure enough, it was confirmed that the foot belonged to Antonio. So who exactly was Antonio, and how did he just vanish like that? Curious, right? But before we dive into the rest of the story, make sure you're mentally prepared. Oh, and maybe grab a pair of shoes you really love. You never know, right? Curious about the rest of the story? Before you hear it, follow these steps first.
Before we dive into the juicy details, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on more shocking stories. And don't forget to like and share this video. Get your friends to watch and hear this story too. Who knows, they might have equally jaw-dropping secrets. Plus, subscribing helps keep me away from boring office jobs. So, do a fellow human a favor, okay?
Antonio was only 22 years old when he was reported missing. He was known as a kind-hearted guy, well-liked by his friends. He graduated from high school and was set to go to college. But he had one big issue in his life: drug addiction. Antonio had been struggling with addiction since he was a teenager, and even served 10 months in jail for possession. Despite his efforts to get clean by going through rehab, he relapsed a few times. Eventually, when he was 18, his parents had no choice but to kick him out of the house because of his addiction. Still, his relationship with his parents remained good. He stayed at a rehab facility for a while after that. Things took a turn when Antonio got into a fight and was kicked out of the rehab center. He told his mom he'd be crashing at a friend's apartment, this guy named Andrew. But just a day after staying there, Antonio disappeared. Not only was Antonio missing, but Andrew had also been stabbed. Andrew told the police that on the night of the incident, he had just gotten back from grabbing food when Antonio suddenly attacked him in his own apartment. After the attack, Antonio fled in Andrew's car. Meanwhile, Andrew asked two of his apartment buddies, Brian Johnson and Isaac Jacob, to take him to the hospital to get stitches for his wounds. The police shifted their focus to finding Antonio, who they believed had run off. A few days later, though, Antonio's car, a 2000 Volkswagen Jetta, was found in Linwood, about 20 kilometers south of his home in Everett. Well, at least the car didn't run off too, one of the officers thought. But Antonio's whereabouts remained a mystery. The investigation dragged on for a year until Antonio's mom, Jenny, posted something on Facebook. Finally, social media gets used for something other than just brownie recipes. In her post, Jenny shared key info from Antonio's roommate, David Wallace. Not long after, the detectives brought David in for questioning. Let's see if David can shed some light or just add more questions to the already long list. David said that the night Antonio disappeared, while Andrew was being taken to the hospital by his two friends, he noticed that Andrew's apartment was a mess, and there was blood everywhere. On the mattress, the carpet, the bedroom walls, the closet, the window, and even the vents. David also mentioned that he didn't see any of the food Andrew claimed to have bought from the store, since Andrew was broke at the time and was only relying on store vouchers. On top of that, David said that after Andrew returned from the hospital, he spent days cleaning up his room. Andrew's two friends, Brian and Isaac, were also called in by detectives. They said they didn't hear any fighting that night. When the cops returned to Andrew's apartment to look for evidence, they couldn't find any blood stains or traces of Andrew's DNA because the place had already been cleaned and too much time had passed. After David's statement, Andrew was arrested, but he was later released when the police couldn't find any solid evidence linking him to the case. Up until now, the authorities haven't been able to figure out why Antonio disappeared or what led to his death, leaving only a severed foot behind. Weird, right? Do you feel like something's off about this case? Because I sure do. I'm super curious. Let's keep going. The police also couldn't decide if this case was a murder or not. 2 years after Antonio's disappearance, his body was never found, and his family is still demanding justice to investigate his death. So why was Antonio's shoe and severed foot discovery the 21st one? And why did it take 4 years to find? Even though the family didn't want Antonio's shoe to be linked to the mysterious case that had happened dozens of times before, the truth is, Antonio's name couldn't be separated from the mystery known as the severed foot mystery. How was this case discovered in the first place? A woman from Washington, USA, was out for a nature walk when she found a right Adidas shoe with a sock inside. When she opened the sock, she found a human foot. She immediately called the police, and when they searched the area, they didn't find any other body parts. The police traced the origin of the shoe and found it was made in 2003 and only distributed in India. The authorities were still struggling to identify the severed foot. Just 6 days after the first discovery, a couple out for a walk on Gabriola Island, about 100 kilometers from Jedediah Island, also found a right Reebok shoe with a human foot inside. They quickly reported it to the police. The investigators revealed that this type of shoe was produced in 2004 and distributed worldwide, mainly in North America. But still, they couldn't identify the foot. After looking into both shoes, the police noticed some similarities. First, both were running shoes. Second, they were both right shoes, size 12. Since they couldn't figure out who the feet belonged to, the police asked the public to come forward if they recognized the shoes. People started speculating, were these victims who took their own lives, victims of a boating accident, or even murder victims? After all, Washington does have a long history with serial killers like Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer. Doesn't it freak you out to live in Washington? It sure gives me the creeps. Unfortunately, the investigation couldn't move forward. Less than 6 months after the first and second discoveries, about 10 kilometers from the second shoe's location, a forest ranger found another right shoe, this time a Nike, also with a foot inside. This third discovery really had the police intrigued because now 3 right shoes with feet were found in close proximity and within a short time frame. Experts quickly jumped in to figure out when these people had died and what might have caused their deaths. They noticed that all the feet were right feet and hadn't decayed too much. Dr. Gil Anderson, a forensic entomologist, ran an experiment by sinking pig carcasses in the ocean. Pigs were used because their anatomy is similar to humans. His research showed that decomposition underwater happens slowly, especially with the humidity, temperature, and geographical conditions of the waters in British Columbia being different from other places. But the decomposition speeds up with sea creatures like shrimp, crabs, and fish feeding on the remains, leaving only bones within 30 to 50 days. Dr. Anderson also explained that decomposition underwater, especially in British Columbia's waters, is hard to pin down because it can vary even if the distances between sites are just a few meters apart. Because of this, he couldn't determine exactly when the 3 victims had died. The forensic examination also faced challenges because the cut on the severed foot wasn't clean. It could have come off naturally through decomposition, or it might have been caused by mutilation, with animals nibbling at the edges, making the cut uneven. Extracting DNA also proved tough since the samples they found were hard to work with. Humidity can promote bacteria, microbes, and fungi growth, which can damage nucleases, enzymes that help preserve DNA, ruining the samples. One day, a man walking his dog near an uninhabited island called Kirkland Island, only about 40 kilometers from Valdez Island, where the third shoe was found 3 months earlier, noticed a suspicious floating shoe with a sock inside. When he checked it out, he found a human foot inside the shoe and quickly reported it to the police. What stood out about this fourth discovery was that the severed foot belonged to a woman. The shoe was a New Balance sneaker made in 1999. Although this was the fourth right foot found, the fact that it was from a woman confused the police even more, as it didn't follow the same pattern. The first 3 were men with running shoes, but now they had a woman with sneakers. Following this fourth discovery, the investigators tried to link the victims to a plane crash that happened near Quadra Island, not far from where the severed feet were found. On February 28, 2005, an MJM Air de Havilland Beaver plane, which took off from Campbell River, crashed just minutes after takeoff and sank. All 5 people on board, 4 passengers and a pilot, were presumed dead, and their bodies were never recovered. This led to the question, could some of the victims have survived and escaped, as none of the seat belts in the plane were found fastened? Or had they perished and these right feet belonged to them? But here's the strange part. All the passengers on that plane were men, yet one of the severed feet belonged to a woman. The families of the passengers requested a DNA test to see if the feet belonged to their loved ones. However, the DNA didn't match with any of the family members. As authorities were still trying to identify the victims and determine the cause of death, another shoe was found on West Ham Island, British Columbia, on June 19, 2008. Interestingly, this 5th discovery was the first left foot after 4 right ones. Upon inspection, this left foot belonged to the same person whose right foot was found on Valdez Island on February 8, 2008. Less than 2 months later, the 6th discovery happened on August 1, 2008. A right foot was found in the Pacific, this time in Washington State, USA, but still close to the previous discovery sites. It was the first find outside of British Columbia. Then, 3 months later, on November 11, 2008, a left foot belonging to a woman was found in Richmond, near West Ham Island. Turns out, it was the same woman's left foot that had been found earlier. In just 1 year, there had already been 7 foot discoveries. The big question is, were these victims of plane or boat accidents, or were they murdered? To figure out their identities, investigators had to match the DNA from the severed feet with the DNA of missing people reported in British Columbia. This would allow them to trace their movements before disappearing and figure out how they died. But here's the issue. Authorities still had about 200 unidentified bodies, while there were around 2,400 people reported missing in British Columbia. Matching DNA from 7 feet to 2,400 missing people, plus 200 unidentified bodies? That's a tall order. Fortunately, after some digging, police managed to uncover the cause of death for the woman whose feet were found. Her identity remained confidential at the family's request, but it was revealed that she had died by jumping off the Petulo Bridge, which connects New Westminster and Surrey in British Columbia. Her body was carried away by the current, with her feet washing up on the nearby islands. Meanwhile, the 3rd and 5th feet, identified as belonging to the same man, turned out to be from a 21-year-old guy from Vancouver who had been missing for 4 years. His family stated there was no sign of foul play in his death. The discovery of feet didn't stop there. On October 27, 2009, yet another right foot was found inside a Nike running shoe in Richmond, British Columbia. And these foot discoveries continued up until January 1, 2009. The case we talked about earlier, Antonio Jordan Hill's severed foot, became the 21st and most unique discovery out of all of them. Another odd find happened when a second right foot was discovered on November 4, 2011, at Sesamet Lake in British Columbia. After some digging, they figured out the right foot belonged to a guy named Stephen Zahorko, a local fisherman who'd been reported missing since 1987. Actually, Stephen's left foot was found first back in 1987, just a few days after he went missing. But his body has never been found, even though the police still believe Stephen didn't die from foul play. After Antonio's foot was found, another man's foot that's already bone was discovered inside a boot on November 21, 2021, at Locust Beach in Washington State, USA. Another foot was found in Port Angeles, Washington, on December 17, 2021, and it was identified as belonging to a woman named Geraldine L. Smith, who'd been reported missing since January 2018. The latest foot discovery happened on July 23, 2023, at Gonzales Beach in British Columbia. But info on this last foot is still limited because the officers had a hard time figuring out if the victim was male or female. So far, there have been 24 foot finds reported from 2007 to 2023. Some have been identified, while others belong to the same victims. Actually, these foot finds aren't the first time something like this happened in British Columbia or Washington State. Back in 1887, the first foot was found inside a boot in Vancouver, British Columbia, at a place that didn't have a name yet. Because of that find, the area was named Lake in Wood Square, which today is a business district and hangout spot for locals. On July 30, 1914, a newcomer from Kimisquid Village in British Columbia also found a human foot in a shoe on a beach near the Salmon River estuary. Because of these mysterious finds, people have come up with a few theories. Some think the victims were boat or plane accident victims, though one of those theories has been debunked, like we discussed earlier. Others believe they were suicide victims, since some identified victims died by jumping off somewhere and got swept away by the water. There are even folks who think these are the work of a serial killer, because the pattern is so similar. All the victims only have their feet left. They were all wearing shoes, and no full bodies have been found. People also have questions like, if the victims didn't die from murder, why are only shoes with feet ending up washed up on beaches or islands? And why haven't some of the feet that were found decayed or rotted? Some experts think that when a body sinks to the ocean floor, it decays much slower than it would on land. But that's where the sea creatures come in, like they got an invite to a big feast, and they start nibbling away until only bones are left. But the shoes victims wore acted like a mystery box that the animals just couldn't crack. Foam shoes float like a little rubber boat, and maybe the sea creatures are like, who left this cool shoe floating here? Meanwhile, the victim's foot, soaking in water, doesn't decay as fast, almost like it's in some eternal spa, thanks to certain environmental factors. It's like the full package, right? Still, a lot of people don't buy this theory. Think about it, heavy boots floating on water? It's like trying to float a fridge in a swimming pool. Makes no sense, right? But what really messes with everyone's head is why all these severed feet are only showing up around the British Columbia coast and Washington State. Is this some kind of secret floating foot club? So far, nobody has an answer, and maybe nature's just playing a weird trick on us. What do you guys think? Are these just coincidences, or are we looking at murder victims here? This is still an unsolved crime case in both areas. If you have any info, feel free to share in the comments. Don't hesitate to throw out your wildest theories, even if you think these shoes were actually secret agents who failed their mission. Just drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to read them. See you in the next video, and hopefully, your shoes stay together and don't end up floating down the coast.